Hi everyone and welcome back to the channel. Well, I thought it was about time that I revealed to you the name and the purpose of the new series that I have been hinting at for quite a while now. So welcome to the first video of Chakra to the Stars. So I've been dropping broad clues lately about my desire to do a new series. I had so much enjoyed doing Tarot to the Nines and got such a positive response, and so many people contacted me to say that they had found it helpful and had enjoyed it so much, and I had enjoyed it so much and found it so helpful for my own learning that I thought, well, let's see if we could do something similar. Now, in Tarot to the Nines, we explored the interaction and intersection between tarot, sacred numbers, sacred geometry, the evolution of consciousness in a grand global scale. And it was a fascinating thing to study. And it put me in mind of something else that's very fascinating to study, and that is looking at the evolution of consciousness on a personal scale. And obviously one can do that through the tarot and through other similar modalities, but there are two modalities that I think are particularly interesting and particularly rich for exploration if you're interested in looking at how your consciousness meets the world's consciousness and how your consciousness develops in a self-actualizing way. And one of the methods and modalities that I like to use is the chakra system, which obviously comes from the kind of Hindu tradition and has a great deal of esoteric significance and history. And I tend to look at the chakra system a bit differently to the way that some people do. I don't think the way I look at it is particularly innovative. It's just that whereas some people look at it in a potentially quite literal way, the idea of there being literal energy centers up and down the spine, energy centers that can have an impact on one's health and well-being and various other things. I tend to look at it in a slightly more symbolic way. So I think of the chakras not so much as actual energy centers up and down the spine, although they can certainly be looked at that way. I tend to think of them as dimensions of being. In fact, I tend to think that rather than the chakras being inside us, we are inside the chakras. So I'll get onto that in a later video. But I just wanted to set out for you my perspective on that. And the other modality that I'm interested in exploring is astrology. Now, I mentioned in a couple of videos that I did recently some of the books that I'm interested in astrology, and I also mentioned how I had come to be interested in astrology, having resisted it at first. And I think a bit similarly to the chakra system, my conception of astrology is different to some. So I tend not to look at astrology as a predictive tool, although I appreciate that it can be used that way. I tend to look at it more as a way of exploring one's psychological, and I mean psyche in the widest sense, so the sense of the soul, the original meaning of psyche, so the soul-logical kind of level. A way of exploring that level using mythic archetypes and energetic archetypes that relate us directly to the world from which we spring. So I see the astrological chart, the natal birth chart, as a kind of mythological soul blueprint, if you like. And I think the richest exploration that one can do is in looking at that natal chart and exploring all the dimensions of the natal chart. And again, I'll get on to what that means in a later video. But this series is not simply about chakras, and it's not simply about astrology. It's about the intersection between the two, because I have found a system which has really impressed me and excited me, and it's about how the astrological energies and the chakric energies can be brought together so that a particular model of your own astrological forces and chakric forces can be charted out for you to explore. And that's what we're going to be doing in this series. We're going to be looking at how that is done. And I'm going to say right up front that this is a system that first came to my attention through reading the work of one of my favourite astrologers, a gentleman called Ray Grass, who wrote this book, The Waking Dream, which I mentioned in my previous video. I will be exploring the system as he describes it throughout this series. But I want to begin by just giving you a bit of an overview so you know what to expect. And I've already suggested to you that if you want to follow along with this series, it would be a really good idea if you got your astrological birth chart printed off from astro.com. Now, a number of you have asked me, does it matter if you don't know your time of birth? Well, in terms of an accurate astrology reading, if you were to go into an astrology reading that is very much focused around your specific astrological data, then to some extent it does matter, because the birth time will determine your rising sign. That's the sign that's rising over the eastern horizon when you are at the moment of your birth. And that's what we call your ascendant, and that has a significance in astrological theory. And it will also determine the placement of your houses. The houses are almost like the places in a tarot reading, the areas that things happen in. And therefore the signs will appear on the houses and planets will appear in the houses, and will give you an idea of the way that the planets are interacting in different areas of your life. However, if you don't have your birth time, you still will be able to have a birth chart which shows signs and planets and aspects between the planets, and there's a great deal of information that can be gleaned just from that. The really good news is that the system that I am describing here doesn't really require the houses or the ascendant, although you can use them in this system, but it doesn't need them. This system is actually going to be looking at the intersection and interaction between planets, signs and chakras. So if you don't have your birth time, but you know your birth date and your birthplace, that's enough. So go to astro.com, get your free birth chart, and you'll be able to follow along with this series, no problem. Let me show you a very beautiful, let me just put the light down a bit so you can see it, a very beautiful representation of the Zodiac Wheel. So when you get your birth chart printed out, you will get something that looks a lot less ornate than this. But I just wanted to show you that this is what you might call the kind of universal zodiac. So it's almost the template upon which all birth charts are based, and it's got the signs arranged in their natural order with their natural houses. So there are 12 houses and 12 signs. The first house is number 1, that's that one there, and the first sign is Aries. So on the cusp of the first house, which is this line there, that's the ascendant, is house number 1 and the sign of Aries. And the reason for that is that the astrological year, if you like, begins on the vernal equinox, when Aries, the sign Aries, is rising over the eastern horizon, and then the signs follow in order from there. So that is the template of the zodiac, and on your chart you'll find that there'll be potentially a different sign. There'll always be the first house there if you've got houses, but there'll be a different sign there depending on what time of year at what moment of you were born, because the ascendant, the constellations move at such a rate that the rising sign shifts every 4 hours. So I was born with Virgo on the ascendant, so my rising sign is Virgo. So you'll discover all that when you get your birth chart. But the reason I want to show you that is that every sign also has a planetary ruler. What that means is that there's one particular planet that has a kind of an affinity with that sign. So on here you will actually see the symbols for the planet. I don't know how clearly you can see that, and you might not know what the symbols are, but Aries is ruled by Mars. We've got Taurus, which is ruled by Venus, and we've got Gemini, which is my sun sign, ruled by Mercury, Cancer ruled by the Moon, Leo ruled by the Sun, Virgo also ruled by Mercury, Libra also ruled by Venus, and this is looking at modern rulers, so it includes the later discovered planets like Pluto, etc. So here we've got Scorpio being ruled by Pluto, and Sagittarius being ruled by Jupiter, Capricorn being ruled by Saturn, Aquarius being ruled by Uranus, and Pisces being ruled by Neptune. However, those are the modern rulerships. Traditional rulerships are slightly different, and I want to show you another diagram which is in the Ray Grass book. And again, is that too bright? It might be there, that might be better. And this shows the traditional rulerships, and what it shows, let me just come around here to be able to see it myself. What it shows is that most of the traditional planets, the original planets before the more later planets were discovered, so that includes Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter and Saturn, each of them, apart from the Sun and the Moon, rule two signs. So Saturn rules Capricorn and, oh, are you in picture? And Aquarius. Jupiter rules Sagittarius and Pisces. Mars rules Scorpio and Aries. Remember that Scorpio was ruled by Pluto in the modern rulerships, but in the traditional rulerships, Mars rules Scorpio. Libra and Taurus are ruled by Venus. Virgo and Gemini are ruled by Mercury. The Sun rules Leo. The Moon rules Cancer. What's interesting is that this is reached by turning the basic zodiacal wheel around. So you remember that Aries was up there. It was so you imagine that this is a dial, and what's happened is they've turned the dial, so that Aries is now there. And when you do that, all of the signs line up with their traditional rulers. So it's just a little way to remember. The signs are still in order, but they've just shifted a bit compared to how they were on that template I showed you earlier. The reason I mention that, the reason that's significant, is that that same template can be used to map the chakras astrologically. So effectively what Ray Grass has done in his system is he has taken these levels and kept them all the same, so the planets and signs are the same, and he has arranged them against each of the chakras. And you'll notice, those of you who are into chakras, that there are only 6 here. Well, there are actually 7, because there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then there are 2 chakras that relate to the third eye. We'll get to that as we go into it in more detail. And then the traditional 7th chakra, which is the crown chakra, is actually not in the human body, it's above the human body in this planogram, so it's not represented in this particular schematic. Now, that is the kind of orientation of the chakras and the planets. So that's how you can combine the symbols together. What you will see, if I just put the light up again, oh, that's a bit too much. Right, behind me on the whiteboard, and I won't go into too much detail of this yet because this is all still to come, I have aligned the chakras. Around the side of the chakras you will see the signs. So there's Saturn at the bottom, which rules Capricorn and Aquarius. There at the top, well, just below the Sun and the Moon, we've got Mercury ruling Virgo and Gemini. And in the middle we've got Mars ruling Scorpio and Aries. And what I've also done, just to make it easy for you tarot people, is I've arranged the Rider-Waite tarot cards that represent each of those signs around the side, so you can get a bit of a sense of what is actually represented there. What you then will see, so the chakras are there with the planets that they relate to. The signs are up the side. What you've got in the black writing in the midst of all this is where my natal chart planets fall on my zodiacal wheel, plotted into this schematic of the planets and the signs and the chakras. So I have got the Moon in Virgo. So you see that my Moon is up there beside Virgo, and because Virgo is ruled by Mercury, which is related to the throat chakra, what it tells you is my Moon is there in relation to my throat chakra. If you look at Chiron, which is over there beside Mars, which relates to Aries and Scorpio. Chiron is in Aries on my chart, so there it is next to Aries, and therefore next to the solar plexus chakra. And down at the bottom where I've got Saturn, my Jupiter, which is on the right hand side, is in Aquarius. So that tells me that my Jupiter is interacting with my root chakra. I hope that makes sense. I know it's a bit difficult if you haven't studied astrology and you don't quite know what's in your birth chart, it can be a bit difficult to follow. But to put it really simply, for the purposes of this video, because I'm going to close now and let you digest some of what you've heard, what this system does is it takes your natal birth chart, it looks at which planets are in which signs in your natal birth chart, and then, because each sign is related to a particular chakra, we are able to tell which of your planets is interacting with a particular chakra. What can you do with this? Well, you can look at how those energies interact. So from my point of view, looking, for example, in my chakra of creativity and generativity, the second chakra, I've got Mars, which is a very fiery, passionate, forceful kind of planet. But it's in Pisces, which is a rather watery, fluid, receptive kind of sign. Now, what does that mean in terms of the way that my creativity expresses itself in the world? Another example, Mercury, throat chakra. I have got the moon in Virgo, so the moon relates to Mercury, the moon being about intuition, the subconscious, again a very watery kind of quality to the moon, although it's related to Virgo, which is an earth sign. And then it's also related to Gemini, which is an air sign. And in Gemini, I have got the sun. My sun is in Gemini. I am a Gemini sun sign. And I've also got Saturn. So this shining expression through communication is modified by Saturn's structuring influence and the moon's intuitive, if you like, perhaps even subconscious, unconscious, collective unconscious, mystical quality, which relates to communication, my throat chakra. So it says something about the kind of things I communicate and the way that I communicate them. And it might also say something about the both the qualities of my communication, but also the restrictions of my kind of communication. So in other words, you can look at how your particular chakras relate to your particular planets, and you can interpret them, and it can tell you something interestingly metaphorical about different areas of your life. Because remember, the chakras are dimensions of being in this model, or in my model anyway. So that's a very quick summary of the system. We'll go into it in more detail as these videos unfold. And just to remind you, below is a link to astro.com. Get your birth chart and let's begin.